a physically and psychologically safe workplace. If I consider that the safety of staff is threatened during the meeting, then pursuant to Section 17 of the Work Health and Safety Act, we are duty-bound to adjourn the meeting. Our aim is to ensure all participants are safe and are able to hear, and will take action if necessary to maintain that for our staff and community. Such action may include expulsion from the meeting and restriction on future attendance. We appreciate your attendance and engagement in council activities. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Farmer, and welcome everybody. Good to see, good number of people in the gallery. Always a good sign. So again, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we live, work and play. We pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and recognise their continued connection to these lands and waterways. We acknowledge our shared responsibility to care for and protect our place and our people. Welcome to those who have joined us to the Public Gallery for the 26th of April 2023 Central Coast Council Public Forum. I will now declare that public forum open. And I will be repeating this when we hit the actual formal part of the council meetings, but I do want to just test, if you like, in discussions with staff, we've been talking about how can we improve things for a future council when elected people are returned. One of the areas that both David Farmer and I and some of the executive had considerable experience in council meetings, and we always see consistently issues when the public speaking forum happens just before an item is discussed. Because the problem is, for councillors who may have been briefed on the paper and so on beforehand, have no knowledge of anything until such time as they hear that. And they don't have an opportunity to talk with staff or to talk with themselves about what does that mean. So it makes it very difficult for councillors to actually change things, if you like, on the floor, just as a result of hearing somebody speak at the public forum. So what we just are going to suggest as a trial, no more than that as a trial, but we're going to suggest that we actually hold the public forum at an earlier time, perhaps around 5:30 on a Monday, the day before the council meeting, and we will extend the time to over an hour, and we'll allow sort of 8 to 10 speakers to speak at that for up to 5 minutes, which is longer than the 3 minutes. Now, the value of that means that staff have an opportunity to understand what the contributor or resident has said and is able to advise councillors, and councillors have had the opportunity to hear it and ask staff questions about it. So it works both ways. So it would make a much better form of governance, I believe, better decision making if we had a go at that. So what we're suggesting is a trial of maybe 3 council meetings, and we also want a trial doing that, one, physical presence, but also doing it via electronic means, because we recognise that for this particular part of the world, there are some very long distances, and it might be much more convenient, A, for councillors, and B, for residents, to actually communicate via Zoom or Teams meeting, so we can actually hear what the issues are beforehand. Now, the other thing which we would tentatively allow is to actually allow, if the agenda is not filled up with items speaking about the actual agenda, then we're happy to hear from members of the public on any other issue. So that's quite a big addition to the thing. So we're only going to try it, but we'll trial it over the next 3 months and see how we go. At the end of that, there will be a formal report to council. There will be formal consultation as well as, but the purpose of that is to try and ensure we get a better result for a new council coming on board and better consideration of the issues by both the public and by the councillors in the future. With that, we will move on to more of the public forum, and just want to remind people that the forum is being webcast, and that means your image and what you say will be broadcast live to the community. Please switch your mobile phones off and to remain so that they remain silent for the duration. Also, please stay seated. The other thing is I just need to remind people that you're not able to take photographs inside the chamber. It is a photography-free place, if I might couch it that way. And I think that's all we need to say at that stage. I will now move to ask any of the staff if they have any conflicts of interest. I don't believe we have on the speakers. And just to remind the speakers that you have 3 minutes, and to address the council, you will be, I think there's a little bell or something at 2 minutes or 2 minutes 30. So please take note of that. So we will commence, and we have 4 speakers, and Joy Cooper is the first speaker up on item 2.3, the adoption of the Central Coast Plan of Management for Council Community Land 2023. Joy, welcome.
Well, here we are again, Administrator Hart, and I'm going to ask you to reconsider adopting the latest recommendation from the staff of the Economic Development Property Unit. You are no doubt going to ignore my request and rubber stamp that staff recommendation. I expect you'll tell us that you've had legal advice and all the necessary boxes have been ticked. You'll tell us that not having current plans of management and not having certain locations categorised means leases and licences can't be signed, it must be done, dollars in the bank, no time to waste, yada, yada, yada. It's a bit like riding the merry-go-round at the entrance. Round and round and round we go. But there's one big difference this time. 343 submissions. That's a big number to ignore. Have you read any of those submissions, or do you feel comfortable relying on staff reports? That's what the 15 former councillors did, relied on staff reports. And they ended up, well, up the proverbial. It's wonderful that Central Coast Council has finally decided to promote this region as an eco-tourism destination. I just want to check though that council staff understand that eco stands for ecological and not economic. One of the reasons why so many people wrote submissions about the community land plan of management and schedule is because Central Coast people care deeply about our community land. It's why we live here and we expect our council to manage it properly. It is our public land. I've looked at the current plans of management from other local government areas and I've not found one as shallow, flimsy and open to interpretation as the plan before you tonight. The community does not have confidence it will result in the best practice management of our local land. It has many omissions. What happened to the plan of management for the Gosford Council building? Why wasn't it listed as part of the consultation? Will it be repealed? Have you been to the Blackall Mountain? If not, how can you be sure it doesn't need a site-specific plan as per the many comments made at the Woy Woy public hearing? There are many other big sites that should have their own plans of management. Mr. Hart, I could fill my 3 minutes with a list of sites, but I won't, which were poorly or incorrectly categorised or recategorised. And I've looked at all those sites by ground truthing, not desktop analysis. I know the sites, I walk the sites, I've lived in the area. How the ones which I feel need highlighting, highlight the ducks in the row process are the Copacabana sand dunes, which aren't categorised as foreshore, but as general community use. Also, the Wyong Golf Course, which isn't the, I'm not long to go, categorised as sporting fields, but as general community use, and it has wetlands in the lower area and should really have its own plan of management. Plus the suburb of Greenpoint, where I live, and more particularly the Landcom Glen Eagles estate, which is part of Greenpoint, which has corridors of bushlands through it, which are now to be park rather than natural area bushland.
Joy, I'm going to have to ask you to finish up. I've given you a little bit of an extension
The community was told this was an administrative exercise, nothing to see here. Then the exhibition happened over Christmas. Then the good people of the former Gosford LGA were told they had to complete an informal GIPA to get access to the existing
Joy. Thank you, Joy. I gave you the
plans of
opportunity to finish.
management.
Okay. Joy, thank you. I gave you the opportunity to finish up. We'll move now to the next speaker. Thank you, Joy. No, it's 5 minutes. Next time round. And I think the next speaker is Mark Ellis on the same topic. Mark, welcome.
Right. Okay, I'm here to speak against the adoption of this generic plan of management. This very important planning document, which has carried by the Economic Development and Commercial Property Department, which have already sold $71 million worth of public assets, have taken courage of this. The public hearings and consultations on the draft POM has turned out it was just a tick-the-box exercise by council to ignore the community and bring in as more money as the manager of the property said at the Erin meeting and quoted in the public inquiry report. It is to get licences and leases for community land to permit and encourage a range of activities for the foreshore and escarpment. It is to lease and license the land. A POM must be put in place. Now, many people are wondering, how does this opening up and exploitation of natural bushland fit in with the community strategic plan focus of cherish and protected natural beauty, which has the objective to protect our rich environmental heritage by conserving beaches, waterways, bushlands and wildlife corridors. This plan of management is an important tool for managing community land, which is written by council in consultation with the community. The report actually acknowledges and thanks Central Coast residents for their input, although it was largely ignored. 161 people that attended and the 343 submissions might as well not have bothered. There's been 35 pages of suggested changes rejected by the commercial property masters. The writer of this report considers the categorisation that has been recommended are not detrimental to the good management of the land in question and ignore the community. Well, removal of the 30-page Blackwell Mountain POM has scrapped for a generic cut and paste will have detrimental effects on the ecosystem and there's no money to fund it. This should also be retained as a standalone POM, as allowed under the Local Government Act. There are many examples across the coast of natural areas of bushland that have been transferred from the bushland category to the community categories, such as Copacabana and the Esplanade, where sensitive dunes will be allowable leases. See, that is foreshore. That's not general community use. Because these leases and developments will have an impact on the foreshore. And we request that the map plate 10 should be modified to display it as natural area, not general community use. Austin Butler, also a Woiwoi, another area which is very complex, as you see in map 10. It shows the complexity of the site where there's various different sections. There's sporting, there's natural, there's community use. And the legislation of those states, a plan of management should be adopted for an area of community land where all parties consist of critical habitat. And there is a recovery plan for the flying foxes for that area. There are many more examples across the space. Avoca Drive, Green Point, again, transferred bushland to general. Umina Beach, transferred bushland to general. That's actually Cohiba Creek, which is an adjacent riparian zone. Then we've got Memorial Avenue. Same story, material, natural bushland transferred over. So apart from the failed allocation of categories and removal of existing POMs, this proposed policy also fails in the directive to outline how these areas will be maintained, assessed, with the vague and nonsensical assessments than statements that the council has put forward. Now, I can understand the enormity of the task faced by council. Although a cut and paste document, it does not give justice to the land that this is serving. Now, Mr. Administrator, you, as the community's only representative, should speak up for the community and the over 300 submitters who have been ignored and make the changes required or put this plan on hold to act on, and not just rely on the people whose property is to make money and instead of protecting the community, the wetlands, bushlands and foreshores. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ellis. We'll move on to our third speaker, Nick Anderson, who's speaking on item 2.5, which is the submission on the proposed Hunter offshore renewable energy area. Welcome, Nick.
Of environment to properly undertake community consultation. No formal information was provided to the residents of Nora Head, approximately 300 households. No emails, letterbox drops, letters to households informing us of the proposed plans or any public information meetings. The first we heard of the proposed massive wind turbine zone of Nora Head was 10 days ago via a letterbox drop by an anonymous local resident. The randomly researched leaflet suggested making a submission via the Department of Environment portal, contacting our local representatives and sharing on social media. After picking ourselves up off the floor, we have done all three. Living in a small town, we quickly realised that no one knew anything. We canvassed over 200 locals and found one who had happened by chance to attend one of the public meetings that occurred 6 weeks ago. No one knew anything. No one had concise, accurate information. No one knew where to start. Our Facebook page, Love Nora Head, went live 3 days ago. We have reached over 70,000 people. Such is the concern in a proposal that is going to massively impact the community of Nora Head. This has exploded, and yesterday morning, NBN contacted me for an interview. I hope you watched the news last night. How is Nora Head, the town most affected, did not know of public meetings, the plans, not the Heritage Lighthouse, not the Surfing Reserve, not the Surfboard Riders Club, not any of the local cafes, restaurants, shops or businesses, none. Over 200 residents have emailed Chris Bowen's department requesting an extension to the consultation period and to provide more information specifically related to the Central Coast and Nora Head. The response, the submission's closure date is fixed by the formal notice of proposal and not able to be changed. I have forwarded this response to the Energy Commissioner and he rang me personally this morning. His advice is to concentrate on the zone, the shape, the size, the location. We support Council's submission and the points raised. In particular for Nora Head, the issues associated with visual sensitivity. For low impact, these massive windmills need to be 40 kilometres out to sea. The effect on the surfing reserve, the cultural significance of Nora Head, ecological and environmental issues. We support the need for the extension of the consultation period and more specific information that impacts the Central Coast. We support the transition to net zero emissions, but not at the cost of the environment.
I'll have to just ask you to briefly wrap up.
Sorry?
I'll have to ask you to just briefly wrap up. If you
I've
can.
just finished.
Get that done. Right.
Okay.
Thank you. And our fourth speaker, again on the same item, 2.5, Mr. Lowe. Welcome, Matthew.
Thank you, Administrator. I am talking about the area that is proposed as 10 kilometres off the New South Wales Central Coast with wind turbine heights of 240 metres above the sea level. The area runs from Nora Heads to Port Stephens. I believe that in all transformations it is essential the public understand the power structures being implemented and the ramifications of this, including having a voice in the consultation process, as well as understanding the cumulative effects on the environment and the socio-economic effects. The current public-private partnership models are continuing, and global corporations are increasingly the winners in these essentially public-funded assets. If the Minister, Chris Bowen, declares the area and feasibility licenses are granted, developers will be allowed to investigate an area and begin planning. It looks as though Ocean EX is lined up to take the offshore wind contract. Ocean EX has partnered with Equinor, a global energy giant who operates oil and gas fields globally and in Australia. Additionally, at state level, EDF Renewables has acquired the Newcastle offshore wind project. EDF is a French, predominantly government-owned nuclear giant. Environmentally, questions are being asked on the impacts to marine environments. The Green Warriors of Norway have raised concerns regarding the increase to the use of BPA in the turbines and related chemicals and their impact on onshore and offshore environments and ecosystems. One of the main sources of concern is the micro and nano-sized particles released into the environment from the epoxy-based products by erosion from the turbine blades. On the east coast of the US, concerns have been raised with the increase in whale strandings has been occurring through the pre-construction phase of a project near New Jersey, where since December 2022, at least 30 dead whales and 8 dolphins have washed up on the east coast shoreline. In New South Wales, our humpback and southern right whales annually migrate up the east coast. Therefore, very careful consideration on the impact of construction works and the ways to reduce operational noise and impacts on the marine environment is critical for both bird and marine life with this project. The large cost of materials used in construction, maintenance and disposal needs to be carefully reviewed against the power generated by the turbines during their lifetime. Professor Wade Ellison, an Emerite Professor of Physics at the University of Oxford, has just published a note on the inadequacy of wind power. He mentions, the generation of electricity by wind tells a disappointing story. The political enthusiasm and the investor hype are not supported by the evidence. The turbines can harvest no more power than the air and wind speed moving through their area. The blade swept area is key as the power generating zone wind fluctuates and have significant impacts here. Too little and not enough power is generated, and too strong and it needs to be switched off to protect the turbines. He also states that batteries will never solve this failure either. I believe these areas raised require significant investigation to require strong environmental stewardship for future generations and very careful consideration for this project. I'm therefore for the additional council submission and the requested extension. I sincerely hope that the community are genuinely kept informed and involved with and the extension granted.
Thank you, Mr. Lowe. And that concludes our public forum for this evening. And for those who want to get away, you can watch the webcast of the council meeting, which will commence at 6:30 p.m. tonight. And the link to the webcast can be found on the council's website. So thank you, and we'll be back at 6:30.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm David Farmer, the CEO of Central Coast Council, and thank you for being here tonight. The role of the public in council meetings is to observe the business of council. For those wishing to air their views and make representations, we have a number of mechanisms, including the public forum, letters or emails to the administrator or myself, and information on our website and social media channels. Council staff have made available documents with details of all those channels of communication. This meeting requires council staff to attend to perform various work activities. Council staff, like all other workers, are entitled to a physically and psychologically safe workplace. If I consider that the safety of staff is threatened during the meeting, then pursuant to Section 17 of the Works Health and Safety Act, we're duty bound to adjourn the meeting. Our aim is to ensure all participants are safe and able to hear, and we will take action if necessary to maintain that for our staff and the community. Such action may include expulsion from the meeting and restriction on future attendance. We appreciate your attendance and engagement in council activities. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Farmer. And once again, we'll acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we live, work and play. We'll pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and recognise their continued connection to these lands and waterways. We acknowledge our shared responsibility to care for and protect our place and people. I now declare the meeting open. Just to remind you again that the meeting is being webcast and you shouldn't make any comments or statements that might defame or offend. And once again, filming and photography are not permitted in the chamber, and anyone observed to be filming the meeting may be asked to leave. And as I've sort of been doing these days, we'll talk about a few things that have been going on. So I just want to welcome everybody here tonight and those that are watching from home. And I hope everybody was able to enjoy, a long Easter weekend with family and friends. And for once, the weather actually played its part. So Anzac Day, so like many thousands of people across the Central Coast yesterday, I attended the Anzac ceremony to pay my deep respects to the Anzacs. I attended the Terrigal dawn service to present a wreath on behalf of council. There was an amazing turnout of locals, families, veterans and young people, all coming together to commemorate as a community. And I have to say, from my personal point of view, I'm a New Zealander by early days, I guess. And what was nice for me as a Kiwi was to actually hear the New Zealand anthem actually being played. And I have to say that hasn't been common in other ones I've attended in previous years, not so much up here, but in the city. Council does support the Anzac Day events at multiple locations across the coast, and it's been great to hear the many positive and anecdotal reports that services throughout the day were all well attended. Just talking to the RSL at Terrigal, they just say the numbers are increasing year by year, and they're actually reaching a point where they're going to have to start limiting. They don't know how, but they're going to have to start thinking about how they might limit people because it is getting so positive. Earlier this morning, I was invited to attend the Brisbane Water Secondary College Anzac Day service and recite a poem there. And this was a student-run event, and I guess that surprised me. I just assumed, I suppose, that it would be run by teachers and staff, but it was run by the students, and they did a fabulous job of pulling it together. They had slides commemorating, and again, they recognised very strongly the whole of the Anzacs, and I just thought it was a great tribute to the young people there. I mentioned at the public forum that we've had discussions about making some trial changes to the public forum to provide greater access to community members to engage with the council executives and councillors on issues of the day. So as part of that, we're proposing to trial for 3 consecutive meetings, moving the public forum to the Monday, the day before the council meeting, probably held somewhere around 5 or 5:30 in the late afternoon, early evening. And we'll be able to give more time, that's where the 5 minutes comes in, give more time to speakers there to be able to put their case or put their points of view across. We're hoping that with approximately an hour plus the time to be available, we'll get at least 8 to 10 speakers in. And if we don't have that slot filled up with people speaking on items on the agenda, we will allow the slots to be filled up by people able to talk about any issue that they wish to bring to councillors and staff's attention. We are also hoping that we may be able to utilise electronic means to actually get a wider reach. It's a very big council area, and I certainly acknowledge that there's a lot of people live, up to an hour's drive away, and it might be more convenient for them to be able to address the council via electronic means, and it's those sort of technologies that we want to trial as well as the physical presence here. So we will make those changes for the next council meeting, and we'll do it 3 in a row. There will be consultation with the community over it, and there will be a report to council about how community reacted and how people felt about it at the end of that period. Roads. Council is committed to keeping our community updated on the roadworks and maintenance across the coast 2,000 kilometres of road network, and we know that improving our roads is extremely important to the community. We're currently undertaking a weekly Facebook post, and it's being developed at the moment to highlight works that are going on, such as pothole repairs, the heavy patching and road renewals that we undertake. So I encourage people to go to the Facebook page to stay up to date with where those works are taking place. And another thing, we are cooperating with the local police on speeding. There's a target to reduce speed-related road crashes, which doesn't come as a great surprise, I suspect, to many. And motorists will be encouraged to slow down through both an awareness-raising campaign and an extra police presence, with particular focus on those areas where there is a 50 kilometres per hour local roads in built-up areas, as this is where the most vulnerable users of the roads, such as children, older road users and cyclists and pedestrians are there. So don't say you haven't been warned. On engagement, we have a number of things out for community consultation at the present time, and encourage all community members to have their say online or at face-to-face engagement sessions. Some of the major projects out there at the moment are probably the number one is the draft operational plan for 22-23 and the draft fees and charges, where you can actually compare last year's to the proposed new fee and charge. We're also consulting on the Central Coast Street Design Manual, the local housing strategy, and Kibble Park Place Plan and Concept Plan. And we are in fact holding a housing strategy forum tomorrow night here in the council building, where there's a number of the key players, including some of our senior politicians, developers, some residents groups, and a range of other players who are going to talk about some of the issues that the Central Coast in particular is facing with the provision of housing for our residents. We have renewed the Visitor Information Centre at the entrance, and I visited that centre last month, and it's one of our most popular destinations, the entrance, and prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, the actual centre itself welcomed over 27,000 visitors, and the renewed facility caters for that demand and more. It's multi-purpose, more accessible, incorporates a much improved layout, and has outdoor space for public use. It also has a dedicated space for local creatives, which means some of our local creative people can put their wares, we call it on consignment. In other words, we don't purchase it, they can put it there, and if somebody buys it, then we repatriate the money to the producer. But there's some opportunity for our local people to have some wares on display and hopefully get some sales. And it's also there for its key purpose, which of course is to provide visitor information. Community groups. I've had the occasion to go out and meet with some community groups over the last few weeks, and I have to say it's just fantastic getting out and about and talking to them. I enjoy meeting with those progress associations and the individuals that generally speaking, come into the office here and discuss some of the issues with them. And I guess the thing that I'm most able to do is actually clarify what the issues they're talking about, because often it does come about a misunderstanding or thinking that things are issues. And I guess just to name one subject, it's the impact on rates when you get your Valuer General's valuation. And can I assure you, the council is only going to collect 3.8%, which is approximately $7 million more than it collected last year. If your rates have gone up by more than a 74%, sorry, if your valuation has gone up by more than 74%, in other words, you look at your current valuation, the one you received back in 2019 from the Valuer General, and look at the one you've got now in the last week or two, if it's gone up by more than 74%, then the likelihood is you'll be paying more rates. If it's less than, but the other 50%, so the other 50%, where it's less than, won't be paying as much. So there you go. Let's explain. Yes, it's easy to explain, but often confusing. So once again, thank you all for coming along tonight, and we'll get into the meeting. So item 1.1 is disclosures of interest. Tonight, for the sake of absolute transparency, I will disclose that I am a resident of the premises, the subject of report item 2.6, which is the fire safety report. I have no financial interest in the building as I am a tenant, and the tenancy is funded by council pursuant to my employment agreement with the state government. Council staff have notified the Office of Local Government of these facts, and I note that the report does not require me to make a decision, but rather note the report. Now, we'll ask the balance of the staff if they've got anything to assist. I don't believe there is. So we'll now ask the staff to recess, that's correct, to receive the report on disclosures and note my advice by myself. Item 1.2, confirmation of the minutes of the previous meeting. I can confirm that the minutes are correct and that they're full and accurate, and I will now resolve to adopt the resolution that is shown on the screen. Item 1.3, notice of intention to deal with matters in confidential session. There are no items tonight to deal with in confidential session, so again, we will note the resolution that is shown on the screen. Now, I do have an administrator's minute tonight, and I think it's quite an important one. There's been a lot of feedback, and I've had a lot of feedback about the proposed sale of the Woi Woi commuter car park. And we did I considered a proposal at the meeting on the 28th of February to improve the future management of car parking there by entering into arrangement with the incoming owner of Deepwater Plaza Shopping Centre. And we got a lot of advice, or I got a lot of advice, that it would not be a good idea to actually sell that car park or component of that car park. So the other thing that didn't happen is the council is not in the business of owning public commuter car parks. That's a state government responsibility. So it's an odd one out where the council actually owns it, has all the costs associated with it, but gets absolutely no revenue from it. So we proposed at some time ago that the state government should in fact purchase the car park from us. Now, with the change of government that's occurred from the Liberal government to the Labor government, I am far more hopeful that that might receive a favourable response. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to rescind the decisions of the 37th, 23rd of the 4th meeting and of the 37th, 23rd of the 5th, and that were carried at the ordinary meeting on the 28th of February 2023, and not proceed with transfer of ownership of the commuter car park to a private party. I'm going to continue to negotiate for Transport New South Wales for the transfer of the commuter car park at Woi Woi to Transport for New South Wales, and I authorise the CEO to execute a contract if a mutual agreement can be reached on satisfactory terms. I've also taken the opportunity to look at the potential agreement that would come about to extinguish council's option to acquire car park spaces in the car park there at Railway Road. And what I want to do there is allow that to go ahead, but to get written into the contract for the balance of the time, which takes it through to December 2032, that there will be no fees charged for that car park. So there we go. With that, I shall move those resolutions that are now shown on the screen, and hope that helps a few people. Item 2.1, which is the monthly finance report. Mr. Farmer, I think you were going to discuss that.
Yes, I'll talk to the monthly financial report and the investment report. March is an unusual month in that we brought to account in the 1 month the additional $20.66 million in depreciation that flowed from the higher asset values that were recognised in the 21-22 financial statements. This impacts the year-to-date operating performance negatively, though we are still running $27 million year-to-date surplus. This increased depreciation, which has been brought about by increased asset values, can be seen, personified, I guess, by significant increases in tendered prices of capital works and contract labour. This puts pressure on the budget of this council, but the same effect will be in place for other councils across the country. This is particularly challenging in New South Wales when the rate cap is half the inflation rate and well under half the rate of the increase in depreciation. As a result, we're actively reviewing our budget versus actual expenditures, both to manage the current budget appropriately for the current year and also to ensure that the next year's budget, which is on exhibition at the moment, is fine-tuned to ensure that it's well targeted as possible given the constraints. The first column in the table in the agenda, the final column in the table is our current projection for the end of the financial year, and it shows at year end we're projecting an acceptable $11.9 million surplus. Cash holdings, which are outlined in the monthly financial report but also outlined in the investment report, continue to be strong with $706 million in cash and investments as at the 31st of March. Those are placed in legislative required approved deposit recipient accounts, and which are essentially Australian banks. So Australian banks hold that $706 million. General Fund holds $71 million of unrestricted cash, while the Water Fund slips slightly into the red by $1 million. The General Fund cash, however, is sufficient to offset this shortfall. As at the 31st of March, we've expended $108 million in capital works, slightly behind the budget of $113 million across 109 active capital projects. In summary, Council continues to perform solidly financially, but the current conditions are difficult. The disciplines that we've put in place over our recent years have helped us in meeting the challenges.
Thank you, Mr. Farmer. It actually, brings tears of joy to me because for once I don't have to really talk about financials because things are travelling, as Mr. Farmer has pointed out, pretty well. We've had to obviously account for the extra costs that have come in, and which has reduced our originally surplus levels or numbers that we thought we might be able to achieve, but nonetheless, achieving close to $12 million surplus projected at the end of the fourth quarter is actually a pretty damn good business considering where the council's been. So I'm very comfortable with that. I think the fact that we're doing well with our capital program is another testament to the way that we've actually started to improve things. And again, whilst it's not quite 100% at the moment, I'm sure that we'll get close to it by the time we complete the financial year. So if you like, at the end of three quarters of the year, we are showing a considerable surplus at this point in time, so after the third quarter. So our third quarter report, which no doubt will come out next month, will show that in more detail. But with that, I'm very happy to just move the resolutions that are shown on the screen and receive that monthly report. Item 2.2, which is the investment report. The CEO covered off that. I think it's just people, when they look at the number of 700 odd millions sitting in investments, or if you like, in the bank or available, just must be remembered that there's an awful lot of that is actually restricted and we can't use. It's there because it's a developer's contribution, or it's a bond and a guarantee, or a range of other things, and we are not able to use those funds unless we acquit them in the way that they were, and the reason for which they were collected. So whilst it looks a lot, it's broken down into water, sewer, and waste. And for example, waste again is a separate one. There's nearly 100 million sitting in waste alone. Now, those are for future expenditures in waste. It's not money that can be used for everything else. So with those comments, I shall now move the recommendations and adopt the resolutions that are shown on the screen for item 2.2. Item 2.3, adoption of the Central Coast Plan of Management for the Council Community Land 2023. I'm going to ask Dr. Howe to talk a little bit about this.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. This report seeks to finalise a plan of management for council-owned community land. Council can classify land that it manages as either operational land, which is essentially able to be used like freehold land, or community land, which is managed for community benefit. This process relates to community land. Permissible uses on that land are described in a plan of management prepared in accordance with the requirements of the Local Government Act. As part of that process, community land is identified as being one of 5 categories, as shown on the slide. Natural areas may be further subcategorised based on the characteristics of the land. It's important to note that community land included in a plan of management is necessary because that land can only be used for a particular purpose if it is in a category of land that permits that use. For example, organised sport can take place on land that's categorised as sports ground or general community use, but not on land that's categorised as park, as areas of cultural significance, or a natural area. A plan of management includes comprehensive guidance on how land can be used, a schedule of land, and a set of maps. This new POM covers around 2,400 parcels of land, and if adopted, will replace more than 20 outdated POMs. Around 25% of these parcels have not been previously categorised. This is a significant body of work, and I'd like to thank our property team for the time and effort they've put in to bring our statutory management of community land up to contemporary standards. The POM process involves first categorising land, then describing what can occur on each category of land in the POM, and both mapping and listing each parcel. Public exhibition is required for 28 days. This POM was exhibited for 71 days. A public hearing is also required for each parcel that is categorised for the first time or is recategorised. 5 public hearings were held, covering 1,128 parcels. As I mentioned, around 25% of the total number had not been previously categorised. The report from these public hearings, which were independently facilitated, is available in attachment 7 to the council report. Feedback from the consultation process is then considered and a final POM developed for council consideration. Once adopted, a POM is published and more site-specific management guidance can be provided in non-statutory plans and strategies. 343 submissions were received on the draft POM. The issue that were raised most frequently related to the management of mountain bikes in natural areas. While mountain bikes are not specifically addressed in the POM, cycling is permitted as a use in all categories of land. Council is in the process of developing an active lifestyle strategy which will be publicly exhibited and will provide further guidance on mountain bike use on that public land. Other issues raised included accountability for land management, the POM preparation process, the categorisation process, removal of site-specific POMs, and specific POM provisions, mainly related to the proposed categorisation. Objections were received in relation to the categorisation of 22 parcels in Davistown and Gosford East and 264 parcels in a further 45 localities. These objections mainly related to areas categorised as park that submitters considered would be better categorised as natural area. These objections related to around 14% of land included in the draft POM. Under Section 40 of the Local Government Act, it's not possible to change the exhibited category of land in a draft POM without a further public hearing process. In order to allow the POM to be finalised, council officers proposed to retain the exhibited category for 264 parcels that objections were received for, and remove 22 parcels, leaving them uncategorised for the time being. The parcels included because they are generally used for some type of public recreation, which if left out of the POM at this stage would prevent council from undertaking its current management activities. The 22 parcels omitted are areas where council does not currently undertake active management. The category of these in total 286 parcels will be reviewed and, where an alternative category is supported, re-exhibited as part of the proposed annual review of the POM going forward. In addition to these changes, there were minor amendments to wording of the POM document to improve clarity. If adopted, the new POM will come into effect in 7 days and provide council and users of community land with improved capacity to manage and use that land. Thank you, Mr. Administrator.
Thank you, Dr. Howe. First of all, I must acknowledge the large number of emails and comments that my office has received over the last couple of days. I have looked at them, and also thank people for taking the time to make all those submissions to this part of the process. I think it's important to note that of the sort of approximately 2,500 that were out there, effectively for consultation, people commented on only effectively 286, which is the 22 that Dr. Howe mentioned had been left out for the time being, and the other 264 total to 286. The balance, there was no comment on whatsoever. So, if you like, the very, very large majority went through without anybody making any comment on them. Now, I think what is very important is that through the process that occurs, that people will have an opportunity to talk about in more depth the issues that they have raised in this consultation phase, if you like. So the process we're going to sort of move to, if you like, is I'm going to add another resolution into the list of recommendations, whereby for those 286 parcels where we received a lot of comment, I've asked that they go out, if you like. Well, staff will look at them, they will take on board the comments that have been made, and then they will re-release, if you like, those plans of management out for a further round of consultation. So I think Joy Cooper mentioned that I rubber stamp everything. Well, I hope, Joy, that you actually understand that that is not rubber stamping. That is actually responding to some of the community's concern, explaining what the thing is, and allowing for the community to be able to talk to those projects, to those parcels of lands and the proposed plans of management within a 12-month period. So if we move to now look at the recommendations, I've now included, I think it's number 7, and if we just focus on that, if we're going to have to change that, I think, add a new number 7, which says, note that categorisation of parcels included in the objections report, so that's in that 286, will be reconsidered as part of the next review of the plan of management for council community land, which is expected to be publicly exhibited within the next 12 months. So that does mean that there is an including that new number 7 and make those or adopt those as the resolutions of council. We'll now move to item 2.4, which is the report on outcomes of public exhibition of the draft Central Coast Planning Agreement Policy. Dr. Howe, your expertise again.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. This report seeks to finalise the planning agreement policy, which has recently been publicly exhibited. A new planning agreement policy has been prepared to reflect the changes in the environmental planning and assessment regulation and guidance from the Department of Planning and Environment. A planning agreement is a legal contract between a developer and council to provide public infrastructure required to support communities as they grow. This policy seeks to apply a consistent approach to planning agreements between developers and council for this public infrastructure across the Central Coast. On 13th of December 2022, Council resolved to endorse the draft planning agreement policy for the purposes of a 28-day consultation period. No submissions were received, but some amendments have been made to the exhibition draft to clarify the role of the local planning panel and the regional planning panel, to distinguish the process for planning agreements that made in relation to development applications as opposed to planning proposals for rezoning of land, and to remove the template for preparing planning agreements from the actual policy document itself. The recommendations in this report are to adopt the updated planning agreement policy and repeal previous policies that related to the former Gosford and Wyong local government areas. Should Council resolve to support the recommendation, the final policy will be published on Council's website. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Howe. And look, I have to say that I am absolutely delighted from a good governance point of view that this policy has come through and back. I will tell a little story that in some of my earlier years, when I did some work for the state government, I was going around a number of councils where there was issues and troubles, And in one council, and it was a relatively large one at that, I found that in fact the planning proposals in that council were signed off by one person. Exactly, which means the risk for corruption and malpractice is high. So, it's great to see that we have here a policy which enshrines a process by which a very legitimate means of, of moving forward with DAs and planning proposals and rezonings and so on. It's a very legitimate means, but it must be seen to be transparent and above board. So this new policy makes it clear what that process will be. So I have great delight in now resolving to adopt those resolutions that are shown on the screen. We'll move to item 2.5, which is the submission on the proposed Hunter offshore renewable energy. And I hope, Mr. Anderson and Mr. Lowe, that I'm delighted to hear that you got rapturous applause for agreeing with the council's position. Dr. Howe, I think you have some slides.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. No slides on this, but just want to speak to it briefly. This report seeks a council resolution to make a submission on the proposed Hunter offshore renewable energy area. This is in response to a recent public consultation process, as we heard during the public forum, which was initiated by the Federal Department of Climate Change, Energy, the Environment and Water, to seek input into the Minister for Energy's decision about whether to grant access to Commonwealth waters off the Hunter and Central Coast for wind energy investigations. The submission raises a number of matters for the Minister's consideration, but most importantly requests that exhibition material be updated to reflect the potential impacts, both positive and negative, for the Central Coast, and an extension of time for the Central Coast community to provide input. This is because the exhibition materials focused on the Hunter, and many on the Central Coast may not be aware that it also covers Commonwealth waters off the Central Coast. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Howe. Well, I have to say I was absolutely blown away, like the residents were, that in fact nobody bothered to consult with the community here. I guess you could say they did ask us to, to comment on it, but the fact that the Central Coast was omitted from the thing was rather surprising when you look, as the residents pointed out, all the way from Nora Head right up to Port Stephens, trying to think of the place, is encompassed by the proposed area. And I also have to say, from my yachting or sailing, I quite frequently transit up that coast. Yeah, and I know that I don't believe our club was informed about these potential, if you like, hazards offshore. It's enough to contend with the boats that are out there at night, I have to say, moored. So with that, obviously I'm going to support that submission going forward, and with that, adopt the resolutions as shown on the screen. Item 2.6 is the Fire Safety Inspection report for residential flat building at 6 Pine Tree Lane, Terrigal.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. Fire and Rescue New South Wales has undertaken an inspection of a property in Terrigal in relation to the management of combustible cladding. Council is obliged to table reports of this type at the next available council meeting and to consider what measures council, as the appropriate regulatory authority for local level fire safety matters, should take to mitigate the risks identified in the report. A further report will be brought back to the next meeting of council identifying those measures. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Howe, and with that I will resolve to adopt the resolution that is shown on the screen. Item 2.7, amendments to the local planning panel membership. Dr. Howe again.
Thank you. This report seeks approval to appoint additional independent expert members to the local planning panel to comply with New South Wales Government requirements that there be a minimum of 15 independent expert members and 8 community members. There are currently 7 independent expert members and 9 community members on the Central Coast Local Planning Panel. The recommendation is to add 8 members to the panel from a list of approved expert members provided by the Department of Planning. One of those expert members is currently on the panel as a community member, so the recommendation also seeks to change the community members on the panel to 8 from 9 at present. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Howe. Well, we don't have a choice anyway, and I think it probably sounds like a good practice to actually increase the number of representatives on the panel. So with that, I'm going to support and adopt the resolutions that are shown on the screen. We'll move to item 2.8, which is variations to development standards. And again, Dr. Howe, I think you might comment just on the 20-odd that we've approved.
Last one from me tonight, Mr Administrator. This is the standard quarterly report for noting regarding development applications that have varied from Council's adopted development controls. This quarter there were 20 determinations, as you mentioned, that included a variation to a development standard. These are all determined by Council staff as the variation was less than 10%. They typically involve variations to building height and floor space ratio. Thank you.
Thank you. That's just part of normal council business. With that, I'll just move to accept that report on the variations to development standards and resolve to adopt the resolutions as shown on the screen. Item 2.9, which is sale of land for unpaid rates. And Ms. Rakamallara is going to speak to that.
Thank you, Mr Administrator. In line with sound financial management and fairness to all of its ratepayers, Council actively manages amounts outstanding on rates and charges. Council's debt recovery processes are established to support adequate cash inflow to maintain Council's operations, whilst assisting those ratepayers experiencing genuine financial hardship and pensioners through payment arrangements and other concessions. Unfortunately, in some situations, despite various steps taken, ratepayers fail to meet their obligation to pay the amounts outstanding against their property. In these cases, and only as a last resort, Council can proceed to sell the relevant property to recover outstanding amounts in accordance with Section 713 of the Local Government Act. Council will only sell land when all other options have been exhausted and minimum overdue timeframes have been exceeded. For vacant land, this is 12 months, and for all other land, the rates must remain unpaid for more than 5 years. This report provides details in regard to property debts currently meeting the criteria to proceed to the sale of land and the process that will be followed. There are currently 72 properties that meet the criteria, of which 11 are vacant land, 5 are commercial properties, and 56 are residential properties. Of the 56 residential properties, 37 are owner-occupied, with the balance being deceased estates or owned by businesses, and none are owned by pensioners or people who have entered into active payment agreements with
Will you
Council.
just have a moment quiet, please?
The total outstanding debt owed by these properties is in the order of $1.5 million, with some properties not having paid rates in over 10 years.
Can we have quiet, please?
The sale of land process is the process Council will follow as a last resort. Council's aim is to reduce as much as possible the number of properties proceeding to sale. Council and the external service provider will continue to actively engage with the impacted ratepayers to address the outstanding amounts until the date identified for sale of properties. It is anticipated that as a result of the intensive engagement with the impacted ratepayers, only a small number of these identified properties will actually proceed to sale. Experience of other councils indicates that only a quarter of all properties end up being for sale, and it holds true here then that there should be less than 10 owner-occupied properties affected from our approximately 145,000 ratepayers who contribute to services enjoyed by the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rakamarara. So if I can just say that, please note that people who are suffering hardship and have talked to us are excluded, pensioners are excluded. And the last comments that were made there, which is the very large majority, when they get that, actually do pay it. And I have to say, it's totally unfair for ratepayers to support people who own a property and who don't pay rates. Because that's the situation we're faced with, and that's what we're looking to recover from. And there's stuff. Sorry. The chances are you speak at the public forum if you want to talk about it. So with that, and the fact that all councils go through this process, and from time to time, you do have to go through talking to people about their responsibilities to contribute to the general rate take. So with that, I am going to resolved to adopt the resolutions that are displayed on the screen. We'll move to item 210, which is the Community Support Grant Program. This is a regular contributor to our council agendas, where we have a princely sum of approximately $300,000, which is available for communities under the Community Support Grant Program. They have to reach the particular criteria, and I note there's 3 in front of me tonight, which is the Community Support and Outreach Services Central Coast Limited, the Womberel Surf Lifesaving Club, and Wyongar Progress Association Incorporated. Very happy to be able to approve those grants for those particular organisations, and I note that the total is now some $213,000. So after, if you like, 3 quarters of the financial year, we still have a bit of space to go. So if any worthy clubs or services organisations out there wish to apply, there's still money available. So with that, I will agree to resolve the resolutions and adopt those that are shown on the screen. Item 211, which is the Governance Lighthouse Report. Again, this is a regular report. It's a quarterly report. It is based upon the New South Wales Audit Governance Lighthouse themes and areas. It basically highlights areas where risk is incurred for the council and our responses to that. There are no major concerns to be noted, and hence I will just resolve to adopt the resolutions as shown on the screen. Item 2.12, minutes of the advisory group and committee meetings held in January, February and March. The meetings that were held were the Status of Women Advisory Group, Water Management Advisory Committee, Audit Risk and Improvement Committee, Status of Women Advisory Group, the Pedestrian Access Mobility Plan Committee meeting, Coastal Open Space Systems, and Catchments to Coast Advisory Committee, and also Protection of the Environment Trust. So I note that these meetings were scheduled and held, but the Coastal Open Space one scheduled for the 7th of March was unable to achieve a quorum due to insufficient voting members attending. So with that, we will note and adopt the minutes of those committees. And the last item on the agenda is 2.13, which is effectively a request by myself to change the meeting date in October. I have a very close relative who is actually getting married in New Zealand, and I will be in New Zealand at that time, so I'm asking that we delay the council meeting by 1 week till the following Tuesday. And so with that, I'm going to resolve to adopt the resolutions as shown on the screen, which is to change the date to the 24th, from the 24th of October to the 31st of October 2023. And that brings us to the end and conclusion of tonight's meeting. I am advised that I think there will be a cup of tea and a biscuit for those upstairs. I will make myself available for people to have a talk. You might have to help yourself, that's all. It's a self-serve one service, I think, these days. But anyway, I will be there and look forward to that. And with that, I will close the meeting at 7:12 p.m. Thank you. Yeah.